One, too many buttons. All right, we are live now. Um, Mercury is in retrograde, so we definitely had some fun challenges. I'm also not in my home office, so everything is different, but we're here. And I'm really excited to have Heather. And Heather, I'm not sure if you know, but you are on mute. Um,
Yes, I just didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay, perfect. Um, so I think we got connected through my VA, Monica, and I saw that you did kind of finances and spirituality. And, I think that is something that is on all of our minds. And whether you're spiritual or not, you know, with everything going on in the world, like, everybody is feeling the financial pinch. So, and as I was rereading some of the stuff that you sent about our connection. You were in corporate doing financial stuff and realizing that you were unhappy, burnt out. You had all the things you should want and weren't fulfilled. So tell us a little bit about who you are, the path that kind of led you, because I know originally, even when you decided to leave corporate, you weren't necessarily fully on that spiritual path yet, if I read all of that correctly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, first of all, for, inviting me to come in and talk to everybody about this. This is definitely something that I geek out. I feel like this is something that I've found my calling in life, is to just help people in this way have a higher consciousness around money and around finances because, as the world we live in today is, money is how we do the things that we, want to do to make impact in the world. But I did earlier this year in May, I was on the TEDx stage and my talk was essentially about my journey of really discovering what I call that I'd been lied to, or that we essentially have all been lied to. I mean, I'm a millennial. I grew up, my parents are baby boomers, and really just being told that college was the path and that college was the path to go. Um, and, here I found myself 20 some years later ish, where I was like, wow, here I have all the things that I've been told I should pursue, and I don't feel better. Like life doesn't feel easier. It doesn't feel the way that I had been led to believe that it should feel. And so this really sent me down a path of like, okay, it's not this, then what is it? And, at the time I thought, okay, well, I'll just start my own business. Well, I'd been dabbling in new businesses or little side businesses my whole adult life. And I was like, okay, well, I'll start a bookkeeping business. And that led me down all these interesting paths where I started to meet people in one lady I met, she at the time she was starting to do meditation. She was teaching people, essentially teaching people how to meditate, but um it wasn't really like how to meditate. It was more the whole like getting quiet, being mindful, all the things, but calling it meditation or saying like how to meditate. But it was specifically for business owners. And I remember hearing the word intuition a lot. And I was like, what is this intuition stuff? Not realizing that, I'm a highly intuitive being and I've always been intuitive. We're all intuitive. And so it just really kind of slowly led me down this path of just really looking at life differently and looking at myself differently, going through just a lot of my own healing journey. I wrote a book earlier this year about that, and really just in what I describe as all paths really lead, in my opinion, to your money. So, um, looking at all the things that we've been through in life, all the way back to our youth and how those deep-seated beliefs have created patterns, which then have turned into essentially something to do with your finances, how you show up in the world to get a job, how you show up in the world when you're going to college, how you show up in the world in your business, how you show up in the world to help your child who will eventually have, money of their own, all the things. Like, so this is really the path that I talk a lot about is how are these subconscious patterns and these subconscious beliefs really playing out in your life later on and really to this financial path.
That's beautiful. I work a lot with like the patterns people have as well. But like I my aspect is the like past life stuff. Like where did some of these patterns and beliefs really start? Like, whether it's through our generational history, because there's a lot of that, and I talk a lot in various things that I write and share and post. Like we've been in some state of war for thousands of years. And that kind of the terror and the chaos of all of that impacts and creates patterns around money, because it's, our governments like to go to war because they, financially grow from it while, the regular people, perish and suffer and go through depressions and go through losing everything, again, like going back to that concept we've been lied to. um so like all of this stuff is like there are deep-seated collective subconscious and unconscious beliefs and patterns around money. I was even, talking to a friend and coworker yesterday, about the financial struggles that we all have. And like if you happen to be a single parent, there's like that extra layer of like, how do I turn my life around and have success? And like when I was talking to her yesterday, I'm like, it's so perfect that Heather's coming on today. Because this is a cover like we kind of talk about money, but we don't really talk about money, and we don't really talk about like how do we make the shift so that we do things differently. Do you have any like
Yeah.
tips and tricks for people without like, giving your secret sauce away, but just, that little
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love this conversation because I think a lot of it really, so I guess kind of going back to what you were saying about just, our world, kind of how it's evolved to where we are now. Um, a big thing that I talk a lot about is really how, especially right now in our generation and the world we see now, we are living out the patterns and the things that happened with the turn of the century, with specifically World War II. So
Mm,
if you think about it, our grandparents, a lot of us for our grandparents, my grandparent, my grandma, which in some of us it might be, our parents, however, young or old you are, is really we're living the beliefs of that time
mm,
that were really deep seated at that time. And if you look at what was happening around the world, there when World War II was happening, um, you have people that were it was feast or famine. It just everywhere because I mean, even in America, there were shortages of how, like how many shoes you could buy. Like you had to get these coupons. I didn't realize this until I went to a museum recently, the last couple of years, is you had to get these coupons to get things like milk, eggs, shoes, jackets, material, all the things. And I was listening to a thing with Betty Crocker, like the whole thing around the marketing of Betty Crocker, and it was talking about how the sacks that the flour would come in, that they were actually taking the logo off of the sacks of flour because people were using those flour sacks as material to make clothes for their children or for themselves or whatever.
yeah.
I mean, you're talking these are people that we know and love right now that lived through that. So if you look at the magnitude of what that did psychologically to your connection with money, with survival, because money essentially is survival for us. So
Yep.
if we go back generational, I mean, we are living the beliefs and the patterns have been they've been sunk into us from specifically that, like just as recent as that. And that doesn't even go, I mean, generations back to all the things that have happened. So, here we are, a lot of us have been raised, this post-war era of, things have changed, things it's like, oh, we'll just go work at the factory job and, you just work till you're 65 and then you someday retire. But oh my gosh, like how many people have we seen retire in their 60s and they have health problems? They have just all these things. My stepmom, just she passed away last year. My dad and her retired, and has health things. And she was barely a year into it and she passed away. So it's like, at what point do we start asking these questions? Is this really what we're here to do? And I do think, in this time, it's interesting because we're in this time where we have been given a lot of really privilege, whether it doesn't matter what you are,
Right.
like, I mean, even like look at, privilege that we've given our pets and our land and like all the things, right? So like it doesn't matter if you're a purple unicorn or whatever, but it's just the whole point of like here we are in this time that we've been given this magnitude of privilege as human beings. And so it's like, why? I've been asking the question like, why? It's so amazing that I'm here as a woman in a generation where I can, for the most part, speak freely and really do a lot of things that I want to do. But what holds that back? Well, a lot of things that hold it back are really financial, but one's deeper than the financial. And so that is what I help people really start to uncover. And when I started doing this for myself, and it's interesting, as I was writing the book, a deeper layer came out of it where I discovered that it wasn't really my mom left when I was 2. My parents got divorced, and my mom left when I was 2, and she joined the Navy. And, I really lived my whole young life just really longing for my mom, wanting my mom, I've had this whole longing, and it's created this pattern that I have really realized that it wasn't really necessarily the loss of my mom, but it's when I went into that little girl space and I saw the picture of my mom setting me down, giving me a kiss and a hug, and walking away, that it hit me that that little girl created the belief that she's not good enough for her mom to stick around. So it doesn't matter. It's so funny because my mom has asked me questions about this and she's apologized, just all the things we've had the conversation about. I said, Mom, it doesn't matter the truth. Like, I know as an adult, like, I know that you loved me. Like, I know the scenario. Like, I know that doesn't matter. What matters is what that little girl perceived in that moment and then created a belief system around that.
Yep.
That's what's important.
Well,
And
and
that's what
especially
I help
because,
people uncover.
yeah, and little kids, like from the time we're born until at least age 7, like we don't have the emotional capacity to understand why something is happening. We don't understand, like, why did, my mom or my dad do this thing, or why, as an adult, we can, rationalize and say, oh, like, this upbringing that my parent had, they weren't able to do this. They had, things worse than I did, and they were doing the best that they could. But that child that went through it, we just have the emotion. And,
Yeah.
we were like, Bruce Lipton talks about from like, the time we're born until like the 6, 7 age time frame, like we're in this perpetual state of trance where that's how we're learning everything. We're learning all the rules and the ways of being. And we're just absorbing all this stuff. And so like we're absorbing, that pattern from our parents. Um, and we don't understand it. And it is that subconscious or unconscious thing that then rules us.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I mean, so like I just went through, a good bit of training to really learn about like the neuroscience and like things that are actually happening in your brain. And, what I've learned is that your brain is wired for survival. And
mhm,
so all scenarios and all situations that your brain encounters, from age, -0 till you said about 6, 7 years old, it's analyzing and saying like, is this safe? Does this feel good? Does this feel bad? And so then it creates a barrier or a belief structure around that, which essentially goes from your brain and then feeds to the body, which this is where the body plays a role. And so the body then essentially is creating a signal, which we call a feeling. And then that is then sending that signal back up to the brain to go, ooh, that doesn't feel good. I don't feel comfortable in my body. I feel anxious in my body. That's the signal that your body's given you. And then your brain goes through its files and goes, wait, when did that happen? Wait, where's an evidence about that this isn't safe? Oh, yep, it's that one. Oh, I got to throw something up to remind her that this is not safe right now. Stop, do not pass go. Don't do that. And so we have this brain and body connection that's constantly running. And so if we're not tapped into what's happening to the body, which essentially is feeding our thoughts, then what happens is we don't really try to go for the promotion at work. We don't ask that person, hey, do you want to work with me? We don't ask for interviews. We don't step out and use our voice on and on and on and on. And where does that lead? And this is where I say it leads to your money.
mm. And interesting that you bring up like the memory that comes up and the story and the like the whole stop, because yeah, another thing that like I've learned over the years is that not for everybody but for like a lot of people, and I think especially women, um they can't seem to go beyond the financial state of their parents. And that's, I just had of like this is interesting, because if it's about survival, were they watching and seeing that anytime that their parents started to go above a certain amount, maybe things happened, maybe there was more fighting between them, or maybe there was like, anytime their parents had money, bad things started to happen. So like, because not everybody follows that path, but what about that safety gets triggered in that? So that's a just an interesting kind of like my own brain goes, ooh, two thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that you have to remember is that, you watched your parents have parents and grandparents. Again, we're talking like Great Depression here. My grandma grew up in the Great Depression and or she was born during the Great Depression and then into World War II and all the post-war everything that happened. And, you know, everything that my grandma did, I've noticed throughout her life has been in the form of survival. I mean, even think about how when we get married, right? Like women married until recently, and even still it's happening, women are marrying for survival.
Yeah.
It's because that's been their best option for continuing the pattern of their life and essentially surviving. So what you have to remember is that your brain, because it's wired for survival, it's always looking at that safe, not safe. Is this safe? Is this safe? Is this not safe? And so anything that goes beyond what your brain has experienced, that understands, it's going, I don't know what the hell that is. That's not safe. And so it's going to throw up all these things. And absolutely, I mean, and this goes back to the patterns that we've seen play out in our family. And honestly, too, like think about the things that your parents, because of their own limiting beliefs, the stories that they told you about rich people are evil. And like the more money you have, the more problems you have. And the big one I always heard was like, people who have businesses are married to their business,
Mm,
and that they just basically live their business and they give up all their time and their life is like over because they have this business. I mean, I listened to my dad drone on about that forever. So, here I am trying to run my business. And so my subconscious is going like, so yeah, it's playing out all these scenarios to say, do I have evidence that this is safe and this is okay for us to proceed through? Are we going to survive this?
mm,
Because your brain doesn't know if it's safe, not safe, as in like a bear or a lion. It's just perceiving how you felt in your body as a young child. You felt, you heard your parents argue, and so your body tensed up.
mm,
Your system went, whoa, don't like that feeling. And so then it put a thing in your brain and it was like, that's not good. We need to avoid that, avoid, avoid, avoid. And so the story goes. And so this is why it's so important. The first thing that I have people do when they start working with me is start to identify what's happening in your body. Like, what is the signal that
mm,
your body is sending you at any moment in time? And so it's starting to create a pattern and an awareness on, you know, what's happening. So a lot of things that if you think about it, think about like you're driving home, right? You're driving home and you're like, I don't know how I fucking got home
mm,
because you're unconscious, right? But think about throughout your day where you're working, 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 and then all of a sudden you're like, just your body, like your stomach hurts, your body's tight, like whatever. And you're like, what have I been doing the entire day? Well, you've essentially been going unconscious because you're just kind of like every day, like you open emails and you argue with people and you do a report and then you get pissed at your boss and then this person comes in and like you're just moving through your day. And essentially you're going unconscious. And so you're just like reacting. So your body is doing it the thing, your brain is doing the thing. And so what I encourage people to start doing is to start setting what I call alarms, like mindful alarms, and you pause and you're like, assess like like how does my body feel? Okay, my body feels tense. Okay, what was just happening 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes before my alarm went off? That started to activate this feeling that I'm feeling in my system. And so then you start to really pull on that thread of like, okay, well, I'm feeling tense because my coworker just walked in and they said that like we don't really, the sales department isn't really doing that good right now. And so then I had a thought, you didn't realize it, but I had a thought, oh my God, I might get cut, my position, Christmas, blah, 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 blah. But if you're not aware of it and paying attention to it, then all you know is like, ooh, my body tensed up. So this is where I start to help people uncover, okay, I'm feeling this in my body and these are the thoughts that are coming out of that. And then essentially we get to kind of this deep underlying belief, like what's creating the trigger. Here's like an example that happened to me recently that I tell a lot is one thing that I uncovered through my journey is that I have a deep-seated belief that I am not worthy of being like in other people's spaces. That like me taking up space, because my mom left, I have this belief of I I'm not wanted. Like I am not good enough and I am not worthy to be in other people's spaces. So, business owner, that's running deep in me.
mm,
So I had a situation a while back where I had a dentist appointment. I'm new to this area. I live in a more of a country, small town setting now, and have a new dentist appointment. Been putting it off for a long time. Finally, make the dentist appointment. So I'm running late, and I'm like, well, damn, like, what is the dentist? So then I start frantically scrolling my phone. I can't find the appointment. I can't remember the thing. Like, I know the name of the town, but like there's like five dentists with that same name.
oh, wow.
And yeah, it's just like, okay, well, is it this dental or is it dental clinic or like, the whole thing? So finally, I don't know, I called them and they don't have my appointment. And so I'm frustrated, right? I'm frustrated. I kind of, I I tell them in a polite but very direct way, like that I'm frustrated and like this doesn't really bode well for like new clients, blah, blah, blah. So it triggered me so much to have that conversation that I started crying on my way, turning around, crying, going back home. And I'm thinking, why am I having such a reaction to this? Like, what's happening that I'm reacting this way? Well, when I unpacked it, I was like, oh, so I have the belief that like I'm going to be kind of like ousted, right? Like, okay, so here I am, small town, my name's going to get around. This lady's, yeah, unhappy with me, all the things. So then my belief and my deep feeling of feeling unsafe to, be take up space and be heard and all the things. And it's so interesting when I looked at it, I was like, oh my God. And so this happens to us every day when we become, it's like when you're like activated, triggered, whatever is happening, it's like when you start to realize these things are happening, that's when you like start to unpack, okay, what's actually happening here? Like, why am I feeling such an emotional response to something that seemingly shouldn't be affected? And what I find this happening the most is when people start to, they haven't really done this, is when they start to kind of look at their money, they have a situation happen around their money, or they start to dive into this, that there's all these other things around them start to become active in their body. So it's not necessarily that they're having a reaction to the money per se, but there's a subconscious thing happening to where it, because your body remembers, right? Your body's remembering a feeling. So I'm looking at my money, but yet I'm binging Netflix over here over an unseemingly issue happening with my dog. Well, because you're feeling unsafe about what's happening between an argument with your kid and you're feeling unsafe with your money. So that's how these get connected when you're really starting to unpack this stuff around your money.
Interesting. Um, I had a thought. What was it? Oh, crap, I forget. Um, it was about like the connections and the anyway, like there's so much fascinating stuff. Oh, I know one of the things I was going to say is like, when they talk about setting intentions, like how important it is to put emotion behind the intention. Because the mind isn't actually remembering a memory. Like it's like you remember what part of that memory, like you don't remember the actual event, you remember your experience of it
Yes.
and the
Yeah.
emotions behind it, and how like something that triggers that emotion calls up exactly what you said earlier, calls up that memory, and there's like that association. That's why like even sometimes something happens and a song starts playing through your head, and songs evoke emotion.
Yep.
And so like to change that and shift that, and it's just so funny. Like one, I love all like the neuroscience stuff. I've been a little geek throughout the years. Like, it's like I think that'd be like a career, like, if I went back and I knew different things as a child, that probably would have been part of my path. Because it is like, how does the brain work and how do we actually use it to change things? It's exactly what Bruce Lipton, did, but from a cellular basis.
Yeah.
And I just started reading this book called like Design Your Life. So it's about like how to use design thinking to change your life, which is about like one of the things that they do is like to look at our biased thoughts, our biased beliefs, which
Yeah.
are like, so all of this stuff is so interconnected. um you know and like there's something like part of what I wanted to talk about was like, how like the path of what you're trying to move towards and um how it stops us from moving forward. And I wish I could remember because I had like a little aha with what you were saying, and my aha flew out my mind. Um, because there's just so much like incredible stuff that you're talking about, and like all the things that are like my passion, except for like the financial piece. Like, like for me, I always tell people, "Oh, I'm an English major, I don't do math."
I know, and I don't do English. I had to like get like major help. I just would type stuff out, and then she's like, "Okay, well, we're gonna make some changes."
Which like
Okay.
two people's strengths coming together to like form a whole.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so like to kind of answer what your kind of what you're saying about like, okay, I want to have this, yeah, I want to do this thing. I want to have this path. Like, how do I get there? And kind of where does the spirituality come into play? And like, where does, rituals and all of this stuff come into play? And I think, what I've learned is I think this is where we really start to tune in. This is where this spiritual part or whatever you want to call it, like it comes to play. Because what I found is that this is all inside of you. And um, but the problem is we have been taught that everything that we want is actually outside of us,
Mhm.
i.e. the career, the money, the husband,
God.
the white picket fence, all of that stuff, right? So our entire life we've been taught that everything we want actually exists outside of us. And so what we're doing is essentially going back on all of the things that we've been taught to believe and then having to trust and have faith in ourselves again. And when you're coming from a place of where you don't essentially feel whole because there's been this gap that's happened in your childhood and throughout your life, you have to come back to really find that place of wholeness and find that place of feeling worthy again, which is why I ended up calling my book Finally Worthy, which is where I feel like this is like the path that I've been on to really create this space of worthiness for myself and remind myself that I'm essentially worthy. I mean, I even had a situation a week ago where I'm transitioning to this new department my job and um I requested a meeting well, I didn't really request a meeting. I was kind of like forward about like, hey, I need to know the details about this, that, and the other. So then the guy who runs the department, he's kind of high up in the company and had put a meeting on the books with me and this other person that's supposed to be my new manager, whatever. And I remember during this meeting, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm in this meeting with this person who has like a gazillion other things going on. Like, who am I to take up his time over something that like he's already talked to me about it? Like, he's assured me that it's fine, blah, blah, blah. And then I had to have this like, no, like I'm allowed to take up space in this moment. I'm allowed to like have my questions heard and like all of the things. But here I am, on my path, and it's like I had to come back to like, no, it's actually safe, number one, and it's okay for me to take up space in this moment. Um, and so these are the awarenesses that we have to start having as you are moving forward, to anything you want to do. Like it doesn't matter whether it's really financially related or not. It's really coming back to really understanding that you are whole, you are worthy, but also really starting to listen in. Like, I think that's the biggest key is, and that's where I think a lot of like the meditation and the ritual work and the getting quiet and all these things, like that's where this comes in. Like, that's the point of it, so that we can come back to ourselves and that we can really be on a frequency that is that's connected in to what everybody's doing and like, so that we find our people, so that I'm on a frequency that is on a frequency that helps me connect to people that are like-minded, that, are trying to move the world forward the way I am, so that I'm not sucked into this place of like this negativity and that crazy thing and all of that, which, I think it's really important too, what we're consuming. When I
Mhm.
started down this journey, I just, I like cut out a lot of even listening to certain podcasts, certain books. Like I'm just really picky on like what I let into my ears and into my eyes. Like I'm so
Yeah.
picky because your subconscious mind is it's absorbing all of that information in. So, the first thing that I have people do is really this mindful practice that I was saying is really start to tune in. And then also really starting to create some type of practice that you are becoming aware of how you're feeling in your body. And then, and sometimes you don't do anything. Sometimes you're just like, I'm having an emotion right now. And I'm just going to sit here. Like sometimes I just get mad and I start yelling and I'm just like, I'm just going to be mad right now. And I allow myself, that's the thing too, like you can't judge yourself and simultaneously heal, right?
Mm,
So it's like you have to allow yourself to just be like, okay, I'm going to give myself the space to just be pissed off right now and just be mad. And then, but also be consciously aware that like it doesn't go into like, the rabbit hole of hell where like, you're 10 days later and you're still bitching about the same thing, which we've all done that, right? But
yeah.
it's like becoming more consciously aware. And so where does your money come into play? Your money comes into play where you start to become consciously aware of, okay, when this happens, when I check my bank account, when I get a notice in my email about my finances, when so and so sends, like when this event happens, it makes me feel this way. And
Mm,
so your job then becomes to help your body feel safe again. First of all, is like reminding yourself, I'm safe. I am safe. I am safe. I am okay. I am not going to die from this.
mm.
I might live under a bridge, but I'm still going to be safe. I might have to go get a box. I am still safe. Like you just have to come back to that safety. And then once you can, because that's the thing too, like when your brain is that prefrontal cortex of your brain goes offline when you're in that stress state.
Mm.
And so you can't think up a creative solution. You can't come up with any type of solution when you're in that stressful state. Like when you get hit with like some news or even like the smallest thing, like you get some text message, like some random thing came out and your bank account overdrew or whatever, you can't try to make a decision in that moment. You've got to come back to like, you got to calm yourself down. And then you're like, okay, so let's run the scenario. What can I do about this? Like, what is the solution? And this is business, this is our personal, this is all the things that it leads back to.
Uh, Now, can I ask a quick question? I think you mainly work with women, but have you worked with men? And even though like we may know that like it's, fear, is their response or their reaction or like how they're processing stuff, is it different? Like even though like underlying it might be fear and survival, is there like a difference between like how men and women handle these things?
That's a really good question. So, at the baseline of all of it, it's essentially the same,
Mm,
that it's fear, right? So, but men, you have to remember, like in an environment of men, like men have been taught to be the provider, the caretaker, like they're the ones that fix everything. So, when something comes crashing down, whereas women are going to come from like a more internal place of like, oh, I did something wrong. There's something
mm,
wrong with me. I'm broken. Men are a bit more externally based to where like, oh, I fucked this up. Like, oh my God, I shouldn't have done this. It's more externally based. And so that's where when you're looking at, I mean, it's essentially all coming from an internal place, but that's where when you're looking at like how men get triggered versus women get triggered, that's definitely one of the bigger things that I see.
interesting. Um, and I think that makes sense even with like their when they go into like let me fix her mode, which then like also triggers our well I'm broken because he's trying to fix me. Um, and
Yeah.
like, that pattern of, triggering, like our need to like process and stuff is triggering their desire then to try and fix, and they're in like survival mode trying to fix it because like,
Yes.
even as kids, like, there's a part of us that like we're trying to fix our parents so that they'll feed us and clothe us and give us the love and affection that we need to grow and become functioning adults. And so like we're doing all these
That's
things,
so interesting.
but then like as little girls we're like, there was something I did that caused, this reaction in my mom or my dad, and so like this pattern that plays out between the sexes where it's like, okay, if we both stop, and nothing really, like, yes, something eventually needs to be fixed, but at the moment, like, we've got to like calm down. We have to be able to assess the situation and like what really is the problem, because you can fix something, but if you're not fixing the right thing, which is again, until you go internally to understand like what really is happening, you might be fixing this thing like, well, we'll fix the car, we'll fix this. Well, the problem is here.
Yeah.
And so like that problem is going to keep happening because we're not coming here. And so, and even like for men to be able to like process their feelings, their
Yeah, that's
sadness, their
huge.
sorrow, and for women, like you, I think you really, um, like we have to allow ourselves to rage, not to get stuck in the rage, but to let it out and process it, be
Yes.
okay with feeling it, because women are taught to, or girls are taught to like, be seen and not heard, and like, oh my God, like you're mad, like just that's too much. And boys, don't cry.
Yeah.
I'll give you something to cry about and like that. So these whole patterns that have been ingrained in us that then perpetuates the not going inward, because anytime that we were going inward, which is where our emotions were, we were made bad and wrong for it, one way or another.
Yeah, and essentially what we were told, well, we were led to believe is that it's not safe, right? And so I think this is definitely the pattern that I find um just kind of observing men and is that, men and women is that women um they in a lot of times women haven't really been taught how to hold safe space for a man to have emotions and be vulnerable, and this comes into money, intimacy, all the areas, right? And so then, men then don't feel like it's safe for them to be vulnerable and intimate in that intimate space with, finances are one of the most intimate things. We don't think about it like that, but it is. So, here I am, a man, I've become vulnerable with like giving over my money, like not only my money, but like my work, like all those things are so super important to men. And so here I am, like giving you all the things, and I'm becoming so vulnerable and I'm opening you up to my finances. And then something happens, and then you then shame me for it. So what's the two big things? Shame and guilt. So then they become shamed for it by the woman, instead of holding space and like, okay, honey, let's figure this out. Let's partner together type of a thing. And so I think this is where I see the biggest gap between men and women is that, women haven't been properly taught how to hold space for men because they essentially haven't been taught that it's safe for men to also have emotions and be vulnerable and all the things. And so I think this is where, I've been in group programs with men and women, and it's been beautiful because you've been able to experience like how men uh how they actually feel about, like, when they're actually able to like say, yeah, like I feel this way or I think this way or whatever, because then you can be like, oh, well, that makes so much sense. Um and it like unlocks again something in your brain to go, oh, so it actually is okay. And so I think in the last couple of years, what's been interesting to me as we've watched women or feminine like kind of rise, right? Um, what's happened that I've seen is that then we haven't also simultaneously made it safe for men to then more open up into what is like more natural for them.
Mm.
So like, men have been, so where women have been like, oh, they have to marry for safety and all of this stuff. Well, men have had, subconsciously an idea of how they have to show up in the world. And so as women show up more in the world, then we have to then hold space and open up for men to then naturally fall into like their, positive masculine roles and not shame that. Because I think, what I've seen is it's been an interesting paradigm to see this whole like masculinity is like bad or whatever it is, but it's like, no, masculinity is like, that's that's actually like a really positive thing. Like, and when you look at, the dynamic of the feminine masculine when it comes to your money, like you want to have that like safety and all of that stuff. But how does that become? Because the masculine feels safe to have that vulnerability that when they fall, that they're like masculine, but then they have that vulnerability in the feminine. So I think this is where we have to remember that as the feminine rises and our femininity and females rise, we also have to allow that masculine role to rise as well.
Or even to fall and be held. It's
Yes.
like saying that, I was listening to something yesterday about like the Gnostic teachings, and there was like a lot of stuff that came up of like, I think there's some good stuff around what they were talking about, but I think it, again, it was still like a biased, flawed belief because they were going through all this trauma, so they think the world is really evil and designed by something evil where it really isn't. But like one of the things that they said is that basically the law of correspondence, like as within so without, and that like Jesus had preached that like the masculine, must become the feminine, and the feminine must become the masculine. They must become one, and that really, like with what you were saying, that really makes sense on a certain level of like, the man is like, strong provider, and the woman, is more that intuitive, soft flow, and like you're here, but then things are going to happen, and so like when the masculine has to fall, like the woman has to like take on, not indefinitely, but has to take on that masculine role, catch and protect their
Yes.
man, let him heal so that he can be in that vulnerable, like, how do I move forward? How do we move forward? And the feminine
Yes.
is holding that space like that. The two become one.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And that's really essentially the idea behind partnership,
Hmm.
and really to understand that that is the role that you are simultaneously paying with your money. That's the partnership role between you and your money. Because you look at, even if you looked at this as like, I'm here and then my money is here. Okay, so something gets fucked up with the money and I'm here and then I'm like, oh my God, money's bad. And you shame the money, you shame the money, you shame the money, right? So what do we, in the same thing with like, feminine, masculine, like what is it? Oh my gosh, and it's the underlying is let's just shame it. And
Hmm.
so this is where, I have really practiced this compassion, like really, really deep compassion because a lot of times I sit down with people and I'm like, okay, we're going to go through our finances. And, there's so much shame and guilt that comes out of it. And this is where I really encourage people and even myself to just hold compassion. I'm like, this compassion. Like, let's be compassionate for that person who felt like they needed to spend that money at that time. Like I'm working with a girl right now or a woman right now that um bought a lot of like things on Amazon. She kind of did a whole spending spree. She just moved, she had a kid, all the things, and she's, kind of went on a little shopping spree. And now she's like, oh my God, my finances and a lot of shame and all this. And so, I encourage her, I'm like, okay, well, we need to hold space for that person that was really going through something, and really send her some love and compassion because she was going through something. And like, let's allow that piece of you to start to heal, because as you do that, then you're going to start to like heal this person now that's looking at you right now, because you're like, oh my gosh, like she was really going through something. And this again, partnership, like, that person that made that decision that you're like, what the hell were you thinking? Having that compassion for like, okay, well, this was going on. And that's where that communication comes in. And I think this is where we miss the mark with our finances, is that we don't have that open line of communication that's happening with our money. Like we don't. And it's not to be shameful about it, but it's to bring it to the surface to say, this is an issue, and the way that we are going to really partner together, it's communication
Mm,
every time. I mean, my husband and I, like, we constantly are working on, I'm getting better at communicating all the time. I know he is, like, it's always this battle between communication, because we have way like we're black and white in how we think.
mm.
And like he's over here and I'm over here. He's like, why would you do that? And I'm like, because my brain was thinking this way. And he's like, why would you think that? And it's like, and it's the same thing with our money. Same thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think even like if you're not married, to hold compassion for yourself and like, to step back and it's like, okay, self, why did you buy that thing, or why did you choose this thing? Um, and like, what need were you trying to have met? Like what emotion were you trying to like ground? Because I think a lot of times, like, again, like when we have that fear and that unsafety, like we're making decisions trying to ground ourselves. So even like if it's not, I'm buying like these things, maybe I'm buying food and I'm eating food to like
Yeah.
make me feel safe again, like to ground me down, like so to then have that conversation with yourself and look at that compassionately. Because again, the point that you made at the beginning of like, we have to see the underlying belief. We have to ask ourselves, okay, like, what was happening here? What was your thought pattern? Why did you make this decision? So that you can, because like once you create space to understand, why you're doing the things that you're doing, then you can start to make different choices and say, oh, wait a second, I'm in this place again, even if it's like you've
Yeah.
done a really good job for a while. And then, because like I know for myself, sometimes it's like, if one stressful thing is happening, it's like you can kind of move through it and you're fine. But then it's like if you got, multiple stressful things and you're not sleeping well, and it's like this compounded thing, and all of a sudden you're back to like, I thought I fixed this problem. Well, you fixed it when it
You
was like
think
safe.
when the onion was over, it was like that.
And now you got all this other stuff, and it's like, have compassion for yourself and say, okay, like now, like how do we start to like, how do I, start to take care of my sleep so that that gets taken care of? How do I like de-stress myself so that I'm not making these decisions? And then I can, come back to that place of like, okay, now I can move forward and I can make the, right decisions or the better decisions, and
Yeah.
put things back on track. Um,
Well, and I think too, something that I'm really noticing as I'm starting to heal my own trauma is like really realizing that like I lived for so long in a literal trauma response. Like I was
mhm,
constantly in a place of trauma, like I was responding to trauma, which means like I wasn't cognitively able to process through things. And I think that's just happening all over. It's that we
yeah,
just like we're cognitively not able, because it's just so interesting. Like once you start to kind of get out of the cycle of like constantly just responding to whatever state your body and your brain is like, yeah, do this, yeah, do this. Then you're like, oh well, I never thought about that. It's like we had a storm here a while back, and everybody went to the grocery store and bought all the things, and it was all the things with water. And I get a little like on a soapbox sometimes about the whole like let's just buy a bunch of water bottles, and I'm like there's a better solution. Because the water bottles are just so toxic, and people just go out and buy them for whatever. Um, I digress. But I made a comment in a group about you can put water in freezer bags and then put the freezer bags in the freezer. And somebody commented, they're like, why wouldn't you just go get water bottles at the store? Well, and I was like, my compassionate heart was like, well, um, there are some people that can't afford to just go out and buy water bottles. And I said, and the reason why I'm mentioning it is because I learned this thing a couple of years ago and it never occurred to me until somebody mentioned like, hey, I can do these like other things to like preserve water if my pipes freeze, like other than go out and buy water bottles. So it's and so that those types of things keep happening to me where I'm like, oh, well, I never really thought about that. So this is where and we really do have like a creative like mismatch throughout like our whole generation right now. Like there's just like you're just like, why can't people just think of that? Because they don't, because
Yeah.
they've been in this perpetual state of like this responding to some traumatic situation.
Well,
Um,
not even responding, reacting. Because like
yeah,
we want more of the response because the response is like, I'm cognizant of why I'm choosing to do something.
right, exactly.
And I think like to your point, I don't think people realize how much of a state of trauma they have been in. Like, there are so many people who don't realize that you're in survival mode.
Yeah.
Even if you had a really good upbringing, you can still be in survival mode because our parents have been in survival mode, our grandparents have been in survival
Yeah.
mode, our great grandparents, like, and it's this continual thing that has been programmed into us to do these things. It's like, the story about, the girl gets married and, she's cooking something for her husband, they've got a new modern house and she cuts off like the parts of the meat or something and tucks them in. And he's like, babe, why are you doing this? Like it fits perfectly. I don't understand why. And she doesn't realize that she's doing it until she asks her mom. And she's like, well, I learned it from your grandma. Ask her. And the grandmother had like a small oven and a small like pan because that's all they had. So she had to cut the meat to fit the pan.
Right. Yes, you've been taught to do it this way, but it's like it's because of like a multi-generational
Yep.
teaching.
And until
Exactly.
somebody outside of you kind of asks you, and then you go inward and be like, why do I do this thing?
Yeah,
Which again goes back
exactly.
to that partnership of like, even like you and your husband of like, babe, why are you doing this? Well,
Yeah,
because
I mean, and even like, oh my gosh, my son. So my son is 24, and it's just, I'm just like, what are you thinking? And he has diagnosed ADHD, and so I have brought even more, and I've brought even more compassion to him, but it's also opened up the own compassion that I have for myself because I swear to God, I have some type of like mental blockage. Like, why did I do that? And but the more it's like you can start to realize what's happening. But the other thing I was going to say is going back to kind of the science thing, I mean, epigenetics is really teaching us that we are reactivating things in our system. Our environment is actually reactivating what they call junk DNA is actually not junk.
mm-hmm.
It's doing something.
Yep. Yeah.
So, you put that into the mix. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think this is where, self-awareness, and compassion, comes into play big time, especially when you're trying to make any type of moves financially, and especially in this economy right now, is really coming back to a place of what is happening with your money, and really coming back to kind of coming back home to like I am safe, I am worthy, and really assessing the situation, because that's really what I help people do a lot, is really assess the situation with no judgment, no shame, and with compassion. um because I mean, like you watch these shows like Dave Ramsey and like I don't know, all these damn shows, and they're just riddled with shame and
Mm,
guilt and like, oh my God, and it's like I couldn't in the, even going back to what I was saying in the beginning, where I didn't really know, quote unquote, know about spirituality or any of this stuff. I knew that like there was something off about that, but I couldn't ever like put my finger on it. And now that I'm kind of like doing all this stuff, and I'm like, that's a broken model.
mm.
Like, so, like I said, the more that you can bring compassion and really assess the situation, especially right now, I think that's the biggest thing that I've been working with people, like new clients have been coming to me. That's the biggest thing that we're looking at is like, okay, let's look at spending, like what's going on and what can we do with compassion to give you what you need, whatever resources you need, and then simultaneously providing for you at the same time. But I'm actually kind of excited about it too, because I think we've been in this over consumer consumption place for so long that's honestly destroying our planet.
And even like, we're destroying ourselves, not even just the planet, because again, it's that we're trying to ground something and
Yeah,
we don't
it's
know
an
what it
internal
is.
need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, we're at the top of the hour, and going
Okay.
over. I feel like I feel like we're just like on the surface of things. I would love to have you back in
Yeah.
2025 because I think there's just so much. And I'd love like for people who are watching this, like, in my Facebook group, and people on YouTube, like to comment of like, how, like, what other things would you like us to talk about? Because I think there's so much, and we're just like, peeling the corner of the
Yeah.
first layer of the onion off on this topic. Because it is really so deep.
Yeah.
Especially like the neuroscience behind it. And so I want to continue this conversation in 2025.
I would love
Um,
to.
and in the meantime, and I will post these links on Facebook, and then they'll be in the description on YouTube if you're watching it there. How do people get in touch with you to work with you?
Yeah, so like my main website is heatherdoran.biz. And so it has kind of the information there. I wrote a book earlier this year. I do have a thing right now where I am helping people kind of look at their finances, do an assessment and really create a spending plan around that. So that's kind of the main thing that I've been doing. But I mean, the website, you can find information, reach out to me. I'm on all the socials too.
Yeah, and I think you did Facebook and Instagram, so I'll share those
Yeah.
in the comments. So
Okay.
so thank you so much. Like,
Yes. Thank you.
I'm excited to continue this conversation. And like it'll be perfect, like sometime January, February, like, after
Oh,
people are
yeah.
going, like recovering from the Christmas spending, because, I think like that first Visa bill in the new year is always like, why did I buy all that stuff?
Yeah. And really, like, with compassion, take a look at it and say, okay, well, what can we do about this now?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'll reach out to you like probably this weekend, and let's
Yeah,
figure out a time
absolutely.
for next year to talk. So thank you. And if anybody has any questions, please post them in the comments. If you have, things that you would like us to talk about in the next conversation around finances, put those in the comments. And if I can't answer it, I'll make sure that Heather is aware of that, so she can answer them. So thank you so much, Heather. This was like eye-opening, and now I want to like really sit with myself and like, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? So
Yay. That's
perfect.
exciting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Well,
thank
thank
you,
you so
everyone.
much.
I hope you all have a great day.
You too. Thank you.